Good afternoon, everyone, and apologies for the delay. We had some technical difficulties. So you're very welcome here today for this session on academic writing with Johannes Maronda, who is the academic writing tutor with UEL. He's going to guide you through this presentation about essay structure, referencing, and criticality, and I hope you all find it very useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and you can take a look at those as well at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session where we'll be discussing a couple of issues that relate to the planning, structuring, and writing of your assignment. I'm going to be looking at a number of issues that start from how do we plan an essay, how do we break the assessment task into its component parts, how then do we start the drafting process, and this also involves breaking the essay into its component parts like the introduction, how do we develop the body, and how do we conclude. And within the body of the essay, there are various issues that we have to look at. For example, how do we evidence our ideas? How do we engage with those ideas in terms of being critical and interrogating the evidence that is presented by the various sources that we rely on. So the session objectives of this session is to look at how do we plan, draft, and structure the introduction, body, and conclusion of the essay. What frameworks do we use to structure the paragraphs? For example, you will see that most of the paragraphs that we write follow what is known as the PIL framework, which is an abbreviation for point, evidence, explanation, and link. I will explain this in more detail. And also, how do we critically evaluate ideas and use own voice to adopt positions in response to the question asked. If we can, right. Here, I have a typical example of an MA essay question. This is in special educational needs. It says, write an assignment of 5,000 words, describe and critically evaluate the structures, policies, and approaches needed to lead an inclusive school. Consider the roles of different staff members and how best to support pupils with special educational needs and disabilities and their parents. Right. Given such a question, you can see quite a lot is demanded of this essay. So the starting point could be to break it into its component parts so that we, when we go on to look for ideas to use in this essay, you don't waste time looking for sources that don't help you with the answering of the question, but then your literature search becomes more targeted. So when we break an essay into its component parts, we are looking at basically three things. We look at subjects, we look at restrictions, and we also look at instructions. Subjects generally refer to what the essay is about. So this is the general topic, the overall topic. But then there are, within the overall topic, there are restrictions which guide you specifically what you need to look at in response to the essay question. So the restrictions relate to specific context. It could be area, time, it could be other specific settings. And instructions are the keywords that tell us what we need to do in that particular essay. if we can go to the next slide. So, given an essay like the one that I've shown you before, the one that is on the screen now, what would you say are the subject of this particular essay? Because this is useful when you go to the library. You don't simply go into the library. You need to know which section of the library are you looking at. Right, you can respond by raising your hands. Let me see. Can I see the raise hand icon? I can't see the icons here. Let me see. Okay. Right. The chat box. Let me see if I can see the chat box as well. Right. Sophia, can you see the chat box?
Yeah, I can see the chat box and I can see the participants.
Are you able to open it? Right. Normally, yeah, I can't see the chat box from here. Yeah, so yeah, anyone who wants to respond, just feel free to dive in and give your response as to what are the subjects of this particular essay. Okay, there's no response. So looking at this essay is about special educational needs and disabilities. But then the other associated subjects, uh, right. Right. So you are looking at special educational needs and disabilities. You are looking at inclusion. Inclusion is one of the subjects. What about the restrictions? Right. The restrictions could be you are looking this at against the background of the roles. You should focus on the roles of the support the different staff members, and the instruction words are describing and critically evaluating. If you can go to the next slide, these terms are defined in our next slide. Right. So when you are describing, you are giving a detailed account. And when you are critically evaluating, you are giving your judgment on the merits and demerits of particular theories. So in your discussion, you should be considering various views that are useful in any particular concept that you're going to discuss. You are looking at to what extent are each of these ideas helpful in responding to the question, and having delineated your subjects, your restrictions, you can then go on to the library to find the specific aspects of that particular research topic. For example, in this case, you would go to special educational needs, but then you are looking at the policies, you are looking at policies that apply in special educational needs. You are also looking at how teachers apply these policies, and having clearly identified the aspect that you need, you then need to read in greater detail about those particular aspects and how they relate to special educational needs. So you might want to then draft a rough plan. For example, when you do your notes, you could do them in spider diagrams, which show the important aspects of that topic, the supporting evidence, and also quotations if you want to use quotations to back up your arguments. So with that, you make your plan, what you put in your introduction, how many paragraphs you need, if there are 3, 4, and what you put in a conclusion. After that, you can then produce a rough draft. Once you have done that rough draft, you may need to proofread it, or you can send it to my feedback, which is UEL online facility, which gives facility for members of staff to read your draft and give you feedback. But then at the planning stage, you might want to decide on the position you want to adopt to that particular topic. Then the main points, you order them. For example, you can put them in a spider diagram, and then you try to logically sequence them, what goes in the introduction, first paragraph, second paragraph, and you try to see how these connect. And as you do your draft, you might want to check whether the ideas are sequentially linked, and we'll also discuss how to link these ideas. And alongside the main points, we said you need evidence, examples. You might also need data or illustrations to further clarify the points that you raise. Okay, now let's go on to the next point, which is how do we write the essay? What type of writing style do we use? For longer essays like 5,000, which is 5,000 words, these need to be in clearly connected paragraph, and each paragraph should be written in continuous prose, that is full sentences that are linked together. And these full sentences start from the premise of a claim which is contained in the topic sentence. And this topic sentence is usually the first sentence in a paragraph, and it makes certain claims. Then these claims need to be backed by evidence. So your second paragraph, the second sentence could be a supporting sentence, followed by further supporting sentence or evidence. Then the next one could be a sentence explaining this evidence. And then the next sentence could be an evaluation sentence, where you evaluate the evidence that you are discussing, and it ends with a conclusion. So it has to be continuous prose, and all the points should be linked together and integrated. And therefore, in a 5,000 word essay, or in a typical traditional essay, we don't expect to see bullet points or where you number points. These should be integrated within the paragraph. And if we can go back to the previous slide, please. Right. So what else do we need? What else do we need to do when we are writing essay? So when you write essay and you are making discussions, the points that you make or the conclusions that you make, you should realize that these are always fluid. They are not certainties. Therefore, we use language that does not imply certainty. In other words, we use what is called the hedging language, because then as you are discussing and reach a conclusion, you have to take cognizance of the fact that the positions that you take can be challenged by others, and they are not the only sole positions that particular issue. So the language that we use words that do not imply certainty, words like this trend indicates that, or the data might mean this, apparently, or generally, this sort of circumstances imply that in some cases, that when we say in some cases, that it means in other cases it might not be it might not be it might not be the reality, or the evidence suggests that. So how we craft our arguments and how we make our conclusions should be carefully done to avoid taking absolute positions on issues, because social reality is relative. It also depends with the evidence that you present, and also it depends with the background that you are arguing from. Therefore, be careful when you are making these conclusions. And we always use an impersonal, you always use impersonal language or objective language, unless you are writing a personal reflective log, or you are writing about reflective practice. So, say you are introducing your essay, you wouldn't say, I am going to start this by, but you would say this essay will demonstrate that, or this essay will start by looking at A followed by B, C, D, and conclude by. We don't put personal pronouns there. And again, when you are starting sentences, avoid starting a sentence with words like yet, but, and, or, because these are normally conjunctions, because I see some students are in the habit of you starting sentences with those words, but in place of them, for example, yet, you could use however, or additionally, or in contrast, or in addition to. Those type of discourse markers would be recommended. Right now, yeah, so there on the screen are some of the linking words that we use. So we talked about paragraphs being connected together. So when you connect paragraphs, we use discourse markers. We within the sentence, we can also use linking phrases, or connectives, or conjunctions. But then each time you say start a paragraph, try to link the new material that you are discussing to the previous discussion. So how do you do this? You could then try to use words like as discussed before, or from the foregoing discussion. That means from the previous issues that have been discussed, it has been concluded that, but this is also closely connected to your, then you introduce another idea to show this kind of linkage, so that when you are when your readers are reading, they can easily connect or they can easily see how these ideas are linked together, what the relationship is, and how do they contribute to a central idea or a central theme. And when you conclude, you conclude by reinforcing a particular standpoint, or synthesizing. So it could be, you could say, as has been stated above, there are various views to these issues, which include, of these views, it seems view A is the most compelling because you are synthesizing, and that is very important. And within the paragraph, I should have mentioned that words like consequently, in addition, similarly, however, can be used to connect your ideas, as you will see in the later slides. And then, as you conclude the paragraph, synthesize the ideas. You could start by an evaluation of those ideas, making a comparison to show which idea is useful. Then, as you wrap up, you conclude to say this idea is useful in these aspects because maybe it has been demonstrated that it works in practice better than the others. And you can find more of these terms if you go to Manchester Phrase Bank. It has various sections that deal with how to argue, how to connect ideas, how to criticize, and how to make conclusions. Now, right. So the next slide will show you the different types of linking words that you can use. For example, if you want to indicate a next step in the essay, you could say, as said before, or then. When you want to illustrate, this is giving examples. You can say, for instance, in this particular case, and it goes on for contrast, nevertheless, on the contrary, however. Right. So these are some of the words. The slides will be made available to you, and you will be able to look at the various signposting words. Now we want to look at when we introduce our ideas. We've made a plan. We have produced some notes that guide us, and now we want to write the final essay. So you start with your introduction, but in some cases, in fact, in most cases, sorry, the introduction should be written last, although it appears as the first item in your essay, but it should be written last because of the reason that in the introduction, you are looking at the whole essay. You are taking a bird's view of the key issues. So you are summarizing. This essay is going to look at the following aspects of special educational needs, and you highlight those aspects. It's not enough to say this essay will look at special educational needs and see how policy can be applied. That's not enough. We want to see what are those aspects of special educational needs. So particularize, give us, even if it means naming those particular strands of special educational needs or policies that contribute to that particular issue, right? So in the introduction, you highlight or summarize what the key arguments will be. And again, you are also looking what are the key perspectives, what is the theory that will be applied in that particular essay. For example, let's say you are discussing special educational needs and the issue of inclusion. You could then look at what are the various perspectives. It could be the functionalist perspective that comprises the resource model. It comprises also of the medical model. You then look at the social model that includes that includes the a social model that includes how special educational needs can be seen from an environmental perspective and also ecological perspective, looking at the various factors that affect the child. So, in the introduction, you highlight all those key strands of the essay that you are discussing. Then you might want to then look at which perspective do you prefer? For example, is it the medical model or the social model? You could then, in your introduction, highlight that the discussion will center around broadly how special educational needs have been viewed from a medical point of view or from a social model. However, evidence seems to suggest that the social model is more useful when dealing with a diverse range of students, because then it takes into consideration their diverse needs, the backgrounds, and the particular cultural settings that they come from. So whatever solutions or whatever strategies that are implemented to support them will be comprehensive and take the circumstances of each particular student into consideration. So that statement that shows where you are more inclined to is called a thesis statement. So a thesis statement shows a position that you are likely to support, and that's a position should be reflected throughout the essay. So your thesis statement is important because in the introduction, it will immediately guide your reader to say, okay, so this writer is aware of the various perspectives to special educational need, but then they think this position or this particular perspective is the most viable position to take. Now, that's your introduction. And some students might say, how long should be an introduction should be? So I suggest 10% of the overall essay length. So where you are required to write 5,000 words, I would say around 500 words. But then some essays stipulate that you say need to write 400 words in the introduction. If that is the case, then go by the lecturer's prescription. But where you are not given guidance, use the general guidance that an introduction should be 10%, a conclusion should be at least 10%, do not exceed 10%. Now, having written your introduction, you have highlighted the key issues. Now the challenge is to unpack those issues that you have summarized for us. So what you might need to realize is, I have seen some students, they write some very general introduction. This essay will start with that, then it go there, it go there. You see, without any substantive issues, or this essay will discuss how policy is applied, it will look at the limitations of policy, but without looking at the various strands of that of those policies. Yes, you could start by, it will look at how policies are applied in special educational needs, but then it's also important, there are different policies that have been applied to special educational needs, and these include, and you highlight those policies, and you might give an indication of which of these policies are the most popular. So that's an informative introduction. So your introduction should be succinct, but highlight substantive issues that you are going to discuss. So that when you now go on to the body of the essay, the issues that you have highlighted, you could now start by one. Yeah, you take, right. In the introduction, I've mentioned this. So when you go on to your first paragraph, you can then start as highlighted in the introduction. Policy refers to, and policy can come in different forms, which include this. In this section, or this section will focus on this aspect of policy. Then you go on. And remember also, if there are words that you think might mean different things to different people, you need to define them. You could define them in the introduction if that is possible, if you have space. But then my advice is, in the introduction, because you have many issues to deal with, you are summarizing your whole essay, you are looking at perspectives. It's useful then to start defining terms maybe in your second paragraph. If you think that essay is straightforward, and the terms are fairly straightforward and there's no need for definition, then you could leave that out. But then as you write, if you think there's a term that you think might need further clarification, please do clarify. This section will look at policy. By policy, we imply, and you go on. Right. Now, how then do we structure the paragraphs immediately after the introduction? There is a framework known as the Peel framework. This is very useful. I find it very easy, and because it makes your ideas more clearer and easy to follow. So this framework starts with a P, which is a point, then followed by evidence, then the next E is explanation and evaluation, and lastly, link. So what does that mean in reality? So you could start with a topic sentence that summarizes the main idea of that paragraph by making an assertion or a claim. A claim is like when you say special educational needs are controversial, and they can be viewed from different standpoints. But broadly, there are two broad perspectives to special educational needs, which are a functional and a social model. Right. So you could then say this section will start by discussing the functionalist model, which comprises the medical model and the resource model. So in your topic sentence, you are summarizing what that particular paragraph is about. Having introduced with making a claim, or it could be you are starting what the next paragraph will show, you are starting to discuss the medical model. You could start by making a claim that the medical model has been the dominant model that has been used because it relies on an evidence-based platform where as a basis for identifying the needs of children. Then we want to see how that evidential basis is applied, because that's simply a claim. So the next sentence then it will be supporting the claim that you make that it relies on evidence. So you could then say experts who apply the medical model rely on a diagnosis of the various conditions that different students exhibit, and these include. Then you go on to further support. The next sentence could first give evidence, give us the names of the theorists who support that particular position and who else agrees with them. So you could have, say, 3 supporting sentences. As you can see, my two is 3 kind of evidence. So it's evidence, evidence, and further evidence. But then when you go on to the 4th paragraph, you might want to back up this evidence with further explanations, or you are giving examples or illustrations to support what you have discussed. Now, when you get to the 5th sentence, you then evaluate these different viewpoints that you have presented. Which one do you think is the most useful and why? Then you conclude. So when you write, be very careful, because I have seen some students writing 3 sentence paragraphs or 2 lines. That's not enough. A paragraph is a unit within your essay that is talking about one idea that is developed. You start by making a claim. You then support that claim with evidence, examples, illustrations. You evaluate and you conclude. Let's see how this is applied in reality. If we can look at the next paragraph, the next slide, sorry. Right. You see here, I started making a claim. So I said a key running theme within inclusion and special educational needs debate is whether learners with special educational needs should be educated within special or mainstream schools. That is, should learners with disabilities be educated in mainstream schooling? Right. So that's a key central idea that I'm raising. But then I go on to say, right, inclusion has been argued against by experts who take a functionalist approach to managing learning disabilities like autism and ADHD. So those 2 sentences could say comprise my main claim, right? So these experts who use a functionalist approach, what arguments do they raise? So the first sentence now support the claim that you see the claim that students should be educated in mainstream school, in special schools. So how is this supported? The argument often advanced by experts working within the medical model to disability is that the physical, cognitive, psychological, mental, and neurological deficits most learners experience are conditions that reside within these learners. So if they reside within these learners, that means they are different from others, and that means they need a special treatment. So I'm supporting that particular claim that I made in my topic sentence. And as you can see, to demonstrate that I have read widely, I'm not putting simply one writer. I've put three writers there in a multiple referencing format. And when you name drop or multiple reference, your references are not arranged by alphabetical order as in APA. In Harvard, we arrange these references by order of their publication. You can see I start with 2015, followed by 2015 and 2020, because the first one and second one share the same date. I then revert to alphabetical format, the one that comes in the alphabet first. But otherwise, I use the date of publication as the determining formula. Now, the next sentence again is giving further evidence why experts who use the modical model want students to be educated in special schools. So here I go on to say the focus of the medical approach in managing these deficits, therefore, focuses on what is deemed wrong with the individual and the exploration of appropriate support to mitigate or diminish the problem. The medical model treats impairments and limitations affecting special educational needs and disability students as limitations on functionality and place emphasis on cure and rehabilitation. So you can see now what this implies is, because if there's cure and rehabilitation, how are they cured? How are they rehabilitated in special schools? So it gives further support to the first sentence, right? This is then followed by, you can see then there I put two references there to support this view. This demonstrated that I've read widely. I'm not simply copying what this writer is saying or that, but I'm then reading to see which group of writers support this view. What do they say? And then I put that in my own words, which is what we call paraphrasing. But then as I go, I then show contrast of ideas. So I'm providing further explanations here to say, even this is a dominant view. However, there could be variations. So, however, this approach has been criticized as limited in scope by other experts who argue that the medical professionals and scientists have abrogated to themselves the role of gatekeepers and use diagnosis to label and determine service choice for individuals. And again, I put the references there. So this is also related to criticality, because we are not simply accepting the evidence. We need to see, even though the evidence is convincing, who else challenge these views? And is the challenge is strong enough to dismiss this perspective? Or it could be, yes, an argument that is against this particular perspective, but all the same, the perspective remains very useful. So you will see as I develop the ideas. Right now, I then go on to say, despite the criticism, the challenges often faced by special educational students placed in mainstream schools have led a number of experts to dismiss and oppose the idea of full inclusion. And again, I put the experts who raise this reservation. And a range of options suggested include placing students in special schools or creating classes for children with special educational needs in mainstream schools to place to placements in mainstream classes. Right. So the criticism that against the medical model to say these experts have abrogated powers to them and this amounts to discrimination, while it's considered, but then evidence on the ground show that placing students in mainstream schools does not work for these children. And therefore, I am then rebutting the criticism against the medical model to say, even though there's this criticism, but evidence on the ground that has been raised by other experts show that these children do not thrive in these schools. Right. Now, that's an evaluation that I'm making. I'm looking at the various viewpoints and I'm evaluating. I'm using evidence for and against. Right. So, right. So a range of options are being suggested. So what are the implications? So these findings and ideas have led to skepticism towards the idea of full inclusion, resulting in the medical model maintaining its traditional influence on policy formulation in the UK, despite its aforesaid shortcomings. So I'm evaluating, I'm saying, right, this is the medical model. Its strengths are this, but then even there are those strengths, people have found these weaknesses. But then do those weaknesses warrant the dismissal of this policy? The answer is not necessarily, right? So you can see as I conclude there. So as I do that, I evaluate to see whether there is any merit in this criticism or whether there is merit in the medical model. So as I conclude, I say these findings and ideas have led to skepticism towards the idea of full inclusion, resulting in the medical model maintaining its traditional influence on policy formulation in the UK, despite its aforesaid shortcomings. The Equality Act 2010, as an example, has been influenced to a large extent by the medical model because definition of disability in this legislation is premised on the medical model, and I cite the Fredrickson, right? These arguments and practices demonstrate that there's no full agreement on the idea of full inclusion, and the basis of the arguments of the medical school on creating special schools therefore cannot be overlooked. Huh? So you can see the conclusion that I am making. I'm also hedging my ideas. I am not taking an absolute position. What I'm saying is the medical school has some very strong points and there are some very credible criticism against it. But then these arguments against the medical model, when put in practice, they have not been seen to work. And therefore, the arguments for special schools cannot be dismissed. So that's the conclusion that I read. So you can see this is a paragraph that dwells on different sorts of ideas, and you can see there a wide range of references. In total, I think they reach around 8, 9 to show that I have read widely and I dwell on different kinds of arguments. I evaluate those arguments and I reach conclusion. So that's a typical paragraph. Now, if we can go to the next slide. Right. So I have already highlighted most of the points that are written in bullet points in this slide. So as you make arguments, make sure you write clearly, you structure your ideas sequentially. Start with, you are selecting the most controversial ideas and examining them in detail. You present the position that you support first. For example, in that paragraph, you can see the medical model is the dominant model that is being discussed. So I start by discussing that, then I give alternative evidence, and I conclude by saying, besides this flawed weakness, this has been a dominant model. And I'm providing reasons and alternative arguments. So this is all about criticality. So you need to be very critical, look at the various perspectives and why there are these differences in opinions. And also, as you do so, you make judgments. These are your evaluation. You look before the conclusion. I evaluated by looking at the merits. Then you summarize, you synthesize to make a conclusion. A conclusion would really give a point as to what is really useful by drawing together and comparing viewpoints. Next slide. Right. Yeah. So all I'm saying here is when you are dealing with the body of your essay, this is an opportunity where to make arguments, to interrogate ideas, opinions, and facts, as you saw in that paragraph. And each idea or a key point should be supported by evidence or examples. For example, in the medical model, there I demonstrated by giving examples to say, even though this policy is facing criticism, but evidence on the ground show that the students who are included in mainstream schooling are not making any progress. So that's part of the evidence and part of the examples. And of course, I've already mentioned that each paragraph is developing a central idea, like that one that we saw is talking about the medical model and puts evidence to support that. And again, you need to connect these ideas as you discuss using connectives and discourse markers. And you are making critical judgments, which you saw the various merits and demerits of the particular perspectives that are presented. And again, it ends by synthesizing. Right now, when you get to the conclusion, what are we doing? When you get to the conclusion of your essay, you are then summarizing the issues that you have discussed in the whole essay, and you demonstrate to what extent you have answered the question. So your conclusion, like your introduction, summarizes the main issues, but then this summary is now being supported by evidence. This essay has discussed it has discussed the medical model, it has discussed the social model, and it has been demonstrated that the medical model is the dominant model that experts have relied on, and hence it continues to be the dominant model because it's evidence-based, and you give all the reasons that you have supported and reach an overall conclusion. And again, the conclusion should be at least 10% of the whole essay. So it summarizes your main arguments, ties them together to reach an overall position. And in the conclusion, you should not include any new ideas there. You are simply highlighting what has been discussed. And I would discourage you from putting references. Yes, you refer to the experts, but then you shouldn't put new references in that particular essay. If they are the ones that you have used, you are simply reinforcing so and so and say that, and this has been agreed by that expert, and the conclusion reached these days. Okay, so that's our conclusion. go on to the next slide. Yeah, the next one as well. I've already dealt with that. Right. Now, when we look at criticality, we have already discussed issues of criticality as I gave you the examples in the previous, in the exemplar paragraph. So by criticality, what we are looking at is you need to interrogate and see to what extent are the ideas that you are using worthwhile. By, for example, when you talk of the medical model, you start by a description of what is it, when, who, where, what does it apply to? It's applying to a student with special educational needs. But then you then need to analyze, why is this a dominant model? What reasons, what are the basis of its popularity or its wide use? How is it applied? But then what are the alternative views to that? What if it's not suitable for particular environments or for particular students? So what? If it is, then we need to look at other models. What next? Maybe it might be appropriate to use a combination of the various models. So that's a critical thinking model that can be useful to guide you in when you make your arguments. And the next slide simply describes what critical writing is and what descriptive writing. For example, you might have written an essay and your lecturer says your writing is too descriptive. So look at those descriptors of analytical or critical writing and look to what extent does your essay demonstrate those particular attributes. If then that means you need to rewrite and conform to those particular descriptors. For example, are you identifying the significance of a theory? Are you evaluating the strengths and weaknesses? Are you making reasoned judgments? If you are not doing that, then you need to do that. So that's a description of critical analysis. Now, those are the next slide looks at the key elements of a critical essay. It clarifies issues, makes an analysis of compelling arguments, makes a statement of your own position, synthesize arguments, and reaches an overall conclusion. That's simply a guide. Now we want to look at aspects of critical writing. So you identifying you are identifying different perspectives, positions, and arguments, and you are presenting evidence to support the various positions that exist. But then, as you do so in a fair and balanced manner. You are by assessing the strengths and weaknesses, and each time you are discussing, you treat the evidence with caution, what is called polite doubt or skepticism. You are not simply accepting the ideas, but you accept them on the merits that of the arguments that are presented. And of course, we talked about edging language. And as you make these arguments, make sure you synthesize them by making your own judgment, which is your own voice. It's not about a personal opinion. It's not a personal opinion at all, because then you are using evidence to argue what you see as the merits and demerits of particular positions, and that helps you to reach a conclusion. Okay, now the next slide is just an example. We might skip that because our time is, yeah, we are running very late. Now, I just want to quickly go through references. Of course, you have seen in the examples that I gave you, I gave various references inside my text. So when you are referencing, yeah, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. Right. So when you reference for one writer, you put the surname and year of that writer. When you do two writers, it's both surnames and the year of publication. In text citations, you don't use any initials. It's just the surname of the writer. Bandura, 1975 or 1964 says this, or it might be Ridley, open bracket, 2024, close bracket, says this. Or you could start with a statement, then at the end, you put the reference. When you put your reference at the end, you put both the surname and the year of publication in brackets separated by a comma. If we can go to the next slides, please. Right. Yeah. So that's an example of a single author being cited. The next slide. Yeah. So two authors, we list both. For three, we do all the three. But from four, we can then use et al. It's just the first author, and you put et al. As demonstrated there. Next slide. Let's say you are writing and there's no identifiable author, but then in this publication, maybe it's published by the Department for Education. So the Department for Education, DFE, becomes the author. These are called corporate authors, or it could be the BBC or UNFCCC. These are corporate authors. If you cannot find the author, then put the organization that published that particular document as the author. If you can go on to the next slide, please, which talks about secondary referencing. So secondary referencing is when one author cites another. For example, you are reading Marmot and Wilkinson, 2011, but then in that work, they've cited Glenister, but you haven't read Glenister's article. However, you still acknowledge Glenister first because it's the originator of that idea. So you say Glenister, open bracket, 2007, cited in Marmot and Wilkinson, comma, 2011, close bracket, says this. But when you then go on to the reference list, Glenister doesn't appear if you have not read his or her book, but then what appears is Marmot and Wilkinson in the reference list. Now, let's look at books written by different authors. So we have a case like, we have here a book written by Dixon and Lynn, right? So these are the editors, Dixon and Lynn, but various authors have contributed to different chapters. For example, we have Brown and Jackson. So you are taking, say, an idea from chapter 1, written by Brown and Jackson. So in the in-text citation, you write Brown and Jackson say this. But then in the reference list, you then write Brown and Jackson, then the title of that of the chapter, then you say in A.D. Dixon and M. Lane, because those are the editors, as seen in the next example, right? Right, yeah. So as you can see here, Brown and Jackson wrote a chapter in a book published by those editors. Now, when you cite them, you say Brown and Jackson 2013 claim that, right? But then in the reference list, you can see I wrote Brown K and Jackson DD 2013, the history of and conceptual elements of critical race theory. And as you would do for journals, you put that in single quotation marks. Then full stop. Then you say in Dixon AD and Lynn L. Then you put editors. Right. So that end should not be there, is typing error. So editors there, critical race theory, and this goes in italics. Then you put place of publication, publisher, and you put the page numbers of that chapter. And each time you use a different chapter, you do the same. You mention in the in-text citation the authors that wrote that book, and then repeat as indicated. So one particular book then might appear in the reference list 4 times. That is, if you have used 4 different chapters of that particular book, because each chapter is written by different authors and they need to appear separately in the reference list. I hope this is clear, because this is normally tricky for students and they find it very complex to handle. Right now, if we can go back to go to the next slide, writing. So when you write a reference list for a textbook, is straightforward. It's the author's surname, initials, then in brackets, year of publication, then title of the book in italics, place of publication, then colony, and you put the publisher. Any of those aspects, those are separated by commas as shown there, but then place of publication and publisher, there should be, you can either put a comma or a colony. For journals, it's the author's surname, initials, year of publication in brackets, title of the article. The title of the article should be in single quotation marks, then name of the journal in italics, then volume, page numbers in DOI. Right. For websites, it's just the surname and initials, year of publication, then you put the name of that particular article, and you put the URL, right? So like is given there. Now, now we want the next slide shows the different types of references. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so you can see that's how you would arrange your reference list. It's all in alphabetical order. You can see the different. The first one is a book, followed by a journal, followed by a book again. That's a book, and that's a website. That one is a journal. That one is a journal. Journal again, and lastly, that's a journal. Right. So that brings us to the end of this session, and there are some useful links. The Manchester Phrase Bank is where you can get all those linking terms, cite them right online. The last one, just ignore that that link doesn't work anymore. It has changed. It's just the academic tutors, which you can find in the student links. If you go to student links, the second link will take you to the tutoring page. Right, so those are the useful links. And if you have any support needs, you can always book for drop-in sessions, and these happen every day, Monday to Friday, online via Teams. But then if you need in-person support, you can come to the Stratford Library between 12 and 1 on a Tuesday. On a Monday, we are at the USS campus between 12 and 1 again. It's just in the at the reception area. And in Docklands, it's the first floor of the library on a Thursday between 1 and 2 o'clock. Right. So those are the key elements of the issues that I wanted to discuss relating to essay writing. Well, I realize I've compressed and put in a lot of information which might be difficult to follow, but then the slides will be made available and the recording will also be available, so you can go through the slides, listen to the recording, and I think that should be helpful for your assignment preparation and writing process. I thank you. Now, if there are any questions, I'm happy to address the questions. Unfortunately, I am unable to see the chat box, so I can't see any post. Let me see. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now.
I just wanted to say as well, thank you very much, Johannes, for that very informative session. These slides will be on Moodle and the recording from next week. And if you have any questions that you think of later, you can always send them to academicadvisor@icepi.eu. And you can also register for a session with the academic writing tutors, and I'll send all the details for that as well. But thank you once again, Johannes. That was very useful.
You're welcome. Okay. Good luck with your studies, and I'll meet you next time.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.